Shit We've Read is a proud member of Bilo Network, a network of geeky podcasts.
Please visit shitwe'veread.com to support the show.
Now let's talk about some books.
Hello, Internet bookworms, and welcome to another episode of Shit We've Read, a sci-fi and fantasy book podcast hosted by some geeky friends. My name is Jason Rico, and on this episode, we will be discussing The Daughter of Doctor Moreau by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. But in order to do that, I got to introduce my co-host. Joining me is Bella Romero. Hey, Bella.
Hey, you guys. Oh, wait. I did not like that. My voice cracked. Hey, you guys. It's just me and Rico this time, so this should be pretty fun.
Yeah, no Laura this time, but that's okay, because you and I together in a room, I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about and lots of opinions. So,
as always, we are very opinionated people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, as always, we'll get to the episode discussion in a bit, but let's talk a little bit about some of the other shit we're reading. Bella, have you been reading anything fun lately?
Yes, I feel like I've been on a real reading kick in and out of the podcast and my other book club, which I've mentioned occasionally here on the show. So I read, my book club does random books. We just kind of go with whatever we fancy. So the actual book that we read for this meeting, which is actually tomorrow at the time of recording, is Love Boat Taipei, which is such a fun YA romance book featuring American-born Asian students who travel to Singapore, Taipei, and they go on what's supposed to be like a super academic, rigorous study program for young seniors going into their freshman years of college. They're all going to, the top universities. But little do their parents know this is actually like a big love matchmaking adventure, and they end up kind of all rebelling from their parents. Like, yeah, their school, they're learning Mandarin, they're learning let's see, what do they learn? Like ribbon dancing, calligraphy, like all of these like sort of cultural traditions that they maybe don't have back home in the States. And it's just really good. You're in somebody's Bildung's roman story. She's a great character, super relatable, especially for anyone who's like a first gen child of immigrants. It's such a good story. I really don't want to spoil it too much, other than like wild, crazy adventures ensue. There's a love triangle, friends betraying friends. It's great. And then I read the sequel, which was Love Boat Reunion, which features two other characters who were in the first book, but they were side characters. So that was a fun read. I didn't like it as much as the second one. And then I also just recently read Red, White, and Royal Blue, which was a romance novel that came out in like 2019. And as our lovely friend Z mentioned, it was written for me. Somebody went into my brain and was like, what could I write a book on? It is about a romance between the first son of the United States and Prince Henry of England. Henry, not the other H word. Prince Henry. And it's all about it's Alex is the first son, and he is like super politically savvy, but he is a biracial Mexican American. His mother's from Texas, very white Southern drawl mom, but like super badass. And all he wants to do is like turn Texas blue. That's his big dream.
Wow. Okay.
He wants to like go back to his home state and really make a difference. And he goes on this sexual awakening, discovers his like really, really welcomes his bisexual identity, and a romance ensues between, this is all in like the synopsis of the book, but a romance ensues between the two, and it's forbidden because they're both basically the heads of state, right? Or children of the heads of state of their respective country. And they have to keep it a secret. And it's very interesting. Enemies to lovers. Really great writing and very spicy. I was shocked at the spice. I was reading this on my family trip in Idaho and was like, oh my, I need to be in a room for this. I'm in the living room. Grandma's over there. Nieces are over there.
I never would have guessed it was spicy from the cover.
Right? It is, for those of you listening, please Google this cover. It is like, it looks like a super cute rom-com movie poster. It's adorable. Great artistry by the cover artist. Completely thought this was going to be a PG, maybe PG-13 romance novel. No, it got a little spicy. I was shocked. I don't know if I'd give it a rated R, but it was graphic. I liked it though. It was very good. The scenes were written beautifully. I mean, I had no problems with this book.
Nice.
I highly recommend it for anyone looking for like a modern romance novel. So yeah, this was kind of the month of romance novels, I guess, for me, including this book, which we'll get into a little bit more.
A little summer romance. All right, nice.
Yeah. So it's been a very romantic month. So very spicy.
Isn't it great when you find a book that you feel like was written just for you? I feel like it's a high that every book reader chases.
Oh my God!
And then when you find one, you're like, "Oh my God, this is it. This is what I've been looking for," and you spend your entire life looking for it again.
The only way it would have been better was if like Alex and Henry were like female characters, like femmes. They were very like cis men, but it still was perfect, like so perfect. I was like, I am Alex. Like I just was like in Alex's head, and there were Star Wars references. Just like a lot of political commentary that I say all the time in my day job. Like it just was like, excuse me, did somebody steal my thoughts? This is not okay. So big fan. Yeah. At that high, I haven't felt that in a long time. So that was really fun.
You know, it would be kind of a funny exercise to do. You, me, and Laura all write down the ingredients that would make our perfect book.
A blind date?
And then the other ones have to try to find as close to it as possible and see who gets closest.
Oh, that's going to be hard. I think you guys will be really good at that. I'm going to be really bad, but we should try it. We should do it.
It'll be tough because I feel like I've already found it, but potentially. So, but yeah, I don't know. It could be fun.
Yeah, we should. You guys, maybe this is going to be a new episode segment, little like mini-sode when we just need to fill content.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that'd be
blind
fun.
Date with a book. I have a couple blind dates with books sitting on my bookshelf that I'll probably get to now that I've done my homework for my book club and the podcast.
Nice.
But what have you been reading, Rico? Have you found any books that are written for you? Any that brought you joy, sparked joy in your life?
You know, actually, kind of. Mm-hmm. I mentioned this, I think, the last episode, that I was going through a bunch of Isaac Asimov's books because I had read I, Robot and then found out later that his Empire series and Foundation series all took place in the same universe over a span of like thousands of years. Ooh. And so I think probably last time
forgot that part
we talked, I just got through like the Robot series and was beginning the Empire series, I think. Now I have pretty much finished it all. I just wrapped up the last Foundation book. And there was 2 books in the Robot series that I felt like really were written just for me. Because I love Sherlock Holmes. Like I love that kind of style of mystery and detective story. But I also really like sci-fi and like robot stuff. And so there's these 2 books that were basically if Sherlock Holmes and Watson were in the future, but Watson is a robot. And it kind of dealt with like different planets and different types of humans and like what human evolution would look like on different planets. And there was like a murder mystery. And I just read these books and like, how have I not heard about these until now? Like I had no idea this was a thing. Like this is exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, after the Robot series, the Empire series, not my cup of tea at all. Too political. I don't like political stuff very much.
That's true. That is where that's where we diverge.
Yeah. And then the Foundation series, there was the original trilogy and then 2 prequel books written later and then 2 sequel books written later. I like the prequel and the sequel books more because that's where he tries to connect it to his previous stuff. The core trilogy, again, was very political. So the entire, God, I don't even know how many books. There were 12 books, I think, total.
I was going to ask, how many books was that?
I think it's 7 plus 3 plus 5. It's like 15 books, I think, around there. Very up and down. But overall, it's been a fun ride. I can say I'm a true classic sci-fi nerd. But yeah,
I think you were a true classic sci-fi nerd in my book, but
thank you. I appreciate that.
I respect you doing the homework.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
I gave you the credit.
I'm getting my card in the mail now, my official card any day now. So
yeah.
put that in my wallet.
I was going to say, you're going to carry that around.
Oh, yeah.
Proudly.
If that was a real thing, absolutely. Can I see your
want-
ID? Oh, not this ID. Sorry about that.
I want my romance novel card. I'm very into this genre now. Like, I mean, I feel like I always was, but now it's like the more and more that I read these books, I'm like, yeah, just got to embrace it.
I think libraries start issuing library cards that
Based
representative,
on the genre?
yes. And like different tiers. So like, oh, I have this card, but I have the third tier because I've checked out enough books.
Okay.
A little street cred, you know?
Yes, this is actually a plea to the librarians of the world, if anyone's listening, to please do library rewards. I would love to be rewarded for the number of books that I read. I know that there's always like a summer reading program.
Yeah.
And I've actually heard on Book Talk that some libraries let you do it regardless of your age. So Rico, you and I might want to go check that out in Sacramento.
I'm going to murder these kids.
Right? I'm like, bitch, please hold my Starbucks coffee. I can get through some books, let me tell you. So yeah, I just feel like there's an opportunity here to really like reward people. We love our little like extrinsic motivational treats, you know, those milestones.
I'd be happy with a sticker. Just put a little sticker on my card. You know, you read 1 through 10 books, you get a blue sticker.
I was thinking more like read 10 books, get a book bag. You know, read like 20 books, get like a cool bookmark. Like
I'm simple, apparently.
I would like a book light. You know, I would like there's like these things that you can hook your Kindle up to that it'll like flip the pages. So when you're in bed, you can just like put the Kindle above your head and like use a little remote to change the pages. I would appreciate that at night.
So what you want is like when we were in school and you had to do fundraisers, and if you sold enough things, you can choose stuff out of the catalog, right?
Yes.
That's what you want, but reading.
I loved that. Yes. And like Starbucks, it's like you get 250 stars, get a free drink. Yes, I absolutely want to be rewarded.
Okay, I see where you're coming from. All right.
Yeah. 100%. Yes. I mean, I'm going to read anyways, but I would like something to show for it, Rico. Because no one believes how fast I read. So I would also love them to reward me for like, wow, you finished that book in under 24 hours. Like gold star. Like, thank you. I did. Like this book, I think I spent, how many hours would you say you spent reading our book that we're featuring today?
Oh, total hours? I don't know, maybe like 12 max, maybe.
Yeah, it was a quick read. I was pleasantly surprised by that. I wonder if there's a way to check that off.
And that's me, you know, reading a chapter, getting distracted on TikTok, coming back to it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely took breaks. I feel like this was a good book for that.
Yeah.
I think we'll get more into that later.
Well, it sounds like we're ready to jump in, so let's get to it. Again, I mentioned we're discussing The Daughter of Doctor Moreau, which is by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. It is a historical fiction, science fiction. And Bella, would you like to read the synopsis for us from Goodreads?
Absolutely, I would. So from the New York Times bestselling author of Mexican Gothic, a previous feature on this podcast, and Velvet Was the Night, comes a dreamy reimagining of the Island of Doctor Moreau, set against the backdrop of 19th-century Mexico. Carlota Moreau, a young woman growing up in a distant and luxurious estate, safe from the conflict and strife of the Yucatan Peninsula, the only daughter of either a genius or a madman. Montgomery Lawton, a melancholic overseer with a tragic past and a propensity for alcohol, an outcast who assists Dr. Moreau with his scientific experiments, which are financed by the Lizaldes, owners of magnificent haciendas and plentiful coffers. The hybrids, the fruits of the doctor's labor, destined to blindly obey their creator and remain in the shadows, a motley group of part human, part animal monstrosities. All of them living in a perfectly balanced and static world, which is jolted by the abrupt arrival of Eduardo Lizalde, the charming and careless son of Dr. Moreau's patron, who will unwittingly begin a dangerous chain reaction. For Moreau keeps secrets, Carlota has questions, and in the sweltering heat of the jungle, passions may ignite.
All right, thank you for that. Before I ask you for your first impressions, I have a couple questions I kind of want to ask you. So the synopsis states, and maybe listeners you already knew, but this is a reimagining of The Island of Doctor Moreau by H.G. Wells, which was written, I think, like 1896, around there, give or take.
Over 100 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. You yourself, Bella, are you familiar with the original story, or did you come into this blind?
I came into this semi-blind. I've never actually read the book.
Okay.
It's been on my list. I feel like it's a classic.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone talks about it. It's had many films
Mm-hmm.
and other retellings. So I was familiar with the story on a very like high level idea. Like I understood who the doctor was, the hybrids, that there was, people who came to the island and disrupted their community, chaos ensued, people died, etc. So I was kind of familiar with the structure of the story, the main points.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Because I'm always curious when people have either read a original source and read a reimagining, what
Mhm.
that how that influences their enjoyment of the second book, right? Like, does it set up
Yeah.
any expectations? Are you waiting for certain beats of the original story to be met? And when it
Yeah.
doesn't, does it disappoint? So it'll be curious because I've read the original novel, so I
Mhm.
always come at it from that angle, which
Yeah.
does influence my enjoyment of it. So I'm curious to see how our enjoyment differs because of
Yeah.
that.
I mean, there were definitely moments where I was expecting certain things to happen
Hmm.
based on what I understood, like knew of the novel and the story. But I don't think it ruined my enjoyment. I think I was mostly curious as to why those weren't there, but understanding that we've changed the setting,
Hmm.
we've changed the characters and their relationships. Um, that didn't impact me too much. I think it just mostly had me thinking like, oh, I see how she changed that then, or oh, I see why this didn't happen. But without getting too spoilery, it definitely left me with some questions.
Okay.
Not good or bad, just questions. So
Questions. Okay. Well, another question
yeah,
for you, based on we're talking about expectations.
yeah.
You mentioned we've read Mexican Gothic for the
Mm.
podcast before,
Mhm.
so we're both familiar with the author already.
Mhm.
For you, did your experience with the author set up any expectations for you, and of like, oh, I really like that previous book, so I have high expectations, or whatever.
Yeah, so reading Mexican Gothic, I think one of the things we talked about was that book was a slow burn,
Hmm.
as most Gothic books are. And
Hmm.
I think that I knew going into it that it was going to be a slower burn than some of the romance books that I've been reading were like very, very fast. Um, But I was pleasantly surprised that this one was a little bit faster. I felt like there was more happening overall. The pacing, I think it starts off pretty slow to give you a sense of like life on the island, who the characters are. There's a time jump. Um, so yeah, it was really interesting. She definitely did a different job on this one in terms of pacing, which was a nice surprise. I think that's why this book went so fast. I think in general, her books are very easy to read. So that was really nice too. So I know like you were texting me like, have you started yet? And I was like, nah, like I know I'm going to read this book really fast. But I mean, I did start it earlier than the last one, but I still finished right up until we started recording.
Yeah,
But that's life. That's how it happens.
yeah.
But no, I think it was mostly about the way that she tells the story and the pacing that I was really curious about, and her language. I knew going into it that there would be some language that we would need to kind of like dive into and read up on. She does like to use
Hmm.
the vernacular, the vocabulary of the demographic that she's talking about. So
Yeah.
we'll kind of get more into that in the spoilery section. I mean, I think that could be like a non-spoiler, but there was a lot of vocabulary in here that could be challenging.
Yeah.
Um, there is a lot of Spanish that she doesn't necessarily like. She just kind of slips in there, and as I think we're both Spanish speakers, right, and
Hmm.
readers, so it wasn't too hard to figure it out. But there were actually some that were like either specific to that day and age, like the word for carriages or like carts, like the way that the people got around. But also like the Mayan words that were kind of put in there.
Yeah.
Because this area still had a lot of Mayan Indians, because it's, what did we say, 18th century or 19th century
I think this book
Mexico?
takes place like 1881 to 1887.
Yeah, so there's still a lot of native peoples on the island. They still speak their language. The English are trying to eliminate them. The Spanish, the Mexicans are still trying to get rid of them, but they are still very much around in that area. The language is still prevalent. So that was really interesting. So just kind of people come in with that expectation. Have your Google ready. If you're on a Kindle, what's nice is I could just highlight it and it would define it for me.
God, I'm so jealous.
So like that was really nice because I was like, oh, I don't know what that word is. And I was just hold it down. And then it was like, okay, cool. But sometimes even the Kindle like couldn't pull it. It was like, I can't find this word anywhere. So I kind of figured it out through context. So yeah, those were kind of my initial first impressions. Was like I knew language was going to be what I like is that she tries to remain authentic to like the setting that she's put us in. But this was a little bit trickier because I do not speak any Mayan languages. Spanish is very different. But yeah.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of stuff that I was going to touch upon. I do want to point out that this story is told with a very real historical backdrop of the Mayan people and them fighting back against Mexican government and English-born people kind of coming into the area and really kind of fighting for their independence. So while the story itself is science fiction, it's definitely
it's grounded in history, which I think she did in Mexican Gothic as well, which is why I really like her writing. I really love this author because she does such a good job of educating people on the history of the time periods that she chooses. I think all of her books that I've read so far have been historical fiction with some sci-fi or Gothic romance, you know. So yeah, I think this was really interesting. I think you bring up a good point. She does bring in a lot of the history lessons, which I think really added to the story. I think that it made it feel more real.
Oh yeah, it just added to it. Absolutely. I didn't feel like you needed to know what was happening. You didn't need to be a history major.
But it was just, like even better. It was like, oof, you've added more flavor to it. It's like she added some more spice.
And even with the Mayan language, that the words kind of inserted in there, like you didn't need to necessarily know what they meant. It definitely helped, sometimes, but it didn't.
Context, you could figure it out. Exactly. The way that she introduced the language naturally, you kind of pause for a second, but as you read the story, I don't think I paused towards the end at all. Like by halfway through the book, I was like, okay, I know what that word generally means. Right. If I couldn't find it.
An animal. I don't know which animal, but I know it's an animal. I can just move on, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or like based on the description, I could figure out it was a porcupine or, whatever it was. Yeah. So I did like that. Her creative language, super, super well done. I think she does a really good job of that. Without it also feeling pretentious. It feels very accessible, which I think is great. And I just, I don't know. I not a lot of complaints for this book. Let's just say that, at least for me.
No, I'm right there with you. I mean, this isn't spoilery, but I was messaging you yesterday about, I was like, normally I take a lot of notes. I have a lot of questions about things. A lot of things maybe don't make sense. For this story, I was just in it. I didn't really take any notes. I was just enjoying it.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so
it was just such an easy book to get into. Like you said, I didn't have to question a lot. I mean, I think one of the things that I did in my research on the original story was like, what was the reception to Dr. Moreau? And I think some things that I read was that H.G. Wells wrote this book as sort of like a political commentary, like symbolic political commentary on like homophobia and xenophobia. Just kind of like getting people to really question like what makes a person, like what makes man a man. Because these hybrids are people, because they've been created to be people. It's super interesting. Like the original story. I don't know. Okay. There's a lot of analyses there. That I'm not going to pretend to know because I've not read the book. But the other part of it was that there was a lot of criticism that there was that the story wasn't based, as much as it is science fiction, there's not a lot of science to support like the hybrids and the experiments. Like how could you actually get animals to blend with humans like that? And I think this book did a much better job. Again, I haven't read the original, of like explaining how he did it. And also kind of like at sometimes just being like, I, Dr. Moreau, don't know how it worked. Like that's a non-spoiler version, but like at some point we get to like some questions from the people in the story around him who are like, how did you make this result? And he's like, I'm not really even sure. Like, just kind of happened. Which didn't take out from it, because again, if you're thinking about this like right in the 1800s, late 1800s, like we didn't know a lot about, like Mendel had his experiments about genetics, but like we were still kind of figuring that stuff out. So for a doctor to be like, all I know is that it's possible, I haven't figured out how, is actually pretty plausible. And in my opinion, I'm not a scientist though. So like that was pretty easy for me to suspend any disbelief and be like, yeah, sounds about right for the time. Like a white man, because the Dr. Moreau is French, walks into a lab, throws some stuff together. He's cured smallpox, sounds about right. Discovers penicillin on an orange peel, like on a moldy orange. It's kind of how things happened. So to me, it didn't seem that crazy. And the lack of science to support it actually was like pretty accurate for the time. And the fact that he was like, I need more time and more money to really understand what's occurred here. I was like, yeah, sounds like today even. Sounds like now. We don't know how it works. Just give me more time and money. So I don't know. I was able to suspend that disbelief. I don't know about you.
Well, I want to touch upon kind of what you said a little bit ago about the original story kind of being a commentary on homosexuality, because I had never heard that angle before. The what I'm familiar with, and they could both be true, but what I'm familiar with is how vivisection at the time that the book was written was this brand new kind of pseudoscience thing. Mm-hmm. And so many of the classic sci-fi books all sprung out of, hey, there's this thing happening in society, in science. What if it went bad? Like what can this be? And that's what Frankenstein was. That sprung out of the idea of galvanism, I believe it was. And this kind of this new belief of like, oh, you can galvanize things back to life. So then Mary Shelley ran with that, and we got Frankenstein. And this was, vivisection, cutting together things. What can be the bad side of this? What can ultimately become of this? Oh, here we go. You have a doctor creating animal-human hybrids. And that's what classic sci-fi is a commentary on something politically, scientifically, But yeah, so as you were saying, I think this book did a better job at it because it has the benefit of over 100 years of science. Mm-hmm. Silvia Moreno-Garcia can take the original story, the original very loose science, and say, you know what, this might make a little more sense. Actually piecing together animals and humans probably won't work, but what if we kind of look at it more of genetics and infusing some DNA and actually, I should probably have said, let's just go into spoiler territory. We've already kind of been there, but this is your official warning.
I think we've covered the topics in a very high level way. We've teased it. Now let's warn our readers. We're gonna really dive in deep.
Yeah, here. So this is your official warning that now we're gonna get into specifics. So if you haven't read it yet, by all means, go out and read it. As of the time of this recording, the book came out yesterday. So it is still brand new. I think by the time this episode releases, it'll be out for only a week. But by all means, go out and read it if you like. Okay, spoilers. Now we're good.
Where do we want to start with spoilers?
We already kind of touched upon how this is obviously adapted from the original story, just put into Mexico. I think it starts off pretty... what's the word I'm looking for? Pretty accurately to the original story. Obviously you swap out characters and settings, but you have a doctor who's been doing experiments. Mm-hmm. You have a new gentleman who's kind of coming in as an outsider and seeing these monstrosities, these hybrids, and kind of adapting to that. And then from there, that's kind of where it takes a different angle.
And that character is still named Montgomery. Right? Isn't there a Montgomery in the
original?
There
is Montgomery in the original story, but I think this Montgomery serves
a different
the purpose of like two, because the original, there was a Montgomery who was like the person already on the island, and there was a man who was like shipwrecked, and he was like the way in for the audience. Uh-huh. And so I think this Montgomery serves both those roles in one.
That was kind of my impression, again, not having read the book,
Yeah.
but read the synopses. That's what I thought too. I was like, I feel like those two characters are embodied in this Montgomery, which is interesting because he is also one of our narrators or one of our viewpoints in the book. So it's told from the perspective of Carlota and Montgomery. And Montgomery starts off, like you said, as an outsider, but he gets embraced by the island, by the hybrids, by Moreau and his daughter. And it's really interesting to see how he falls in love, not necessarily with like the idea of vivisection, but just like the safety and the space that's been created there.
Sure.
Super interesting.
Yeah. Well, the character, I mean, for people listening, he's had a rough life and he's kind of at rock bottom. So when he's brought in, it's really to take a job because he owes someone a lot of money. So he doesn't have a whole lot of options to begin with. And so I think that's why he's like, well, this is weird, but what else am I going to do? But he really does come to embrace Moreau, his daughter, all the hybrids, the land. And I thought that was such a awesome angle for Moreno-Garcia to take of like, these aren't monsters. In the original book, they were monsters. They were monstrosities. It was almost a horror book. This was not horror at all. This was very romantic of like, no, you have Cachito and you have
Cachito Lupe.
What's that? Lupe? Yeah, like you have these two little, kids who are hybrids, but they're lovable. They're just kids, right?
Yeah, you see the humanity in them. Yeah. And then there's a good reminder that they did not ask to be created. And so when they're being called monstrosities, it's like, are we the monsters or is it Dr. Moreau who created us to be servants to men, to Lizalde and his family? And he bred them to be in pain. He bred them especially the earlier hybrids. So in this book, we hear kind of about like the different generations of the hybrids of the experiments. So there are the older hybrids who are growing much faster than like the average human would, still longer than an animal. Like they might have the lifespan of like 20, 30 years, but which is significantly shorter than a human. So after 20 years, they're already in their old age. They have a lot of uncontrollable growth. They grow their teeth really quickly. And grow too much. Like the teeth get too big. So they actually cause pain. And like their joints are twisted. Like they don't really grow correctly because again, they're not human, but they're not animal. And they're trying to grow in a way that is not natural to their organic being and their function that they should have. And Dr. Moreau let them live. He continued to breed them. So it really, this book really does pose a lot of questions around like, who is the monster in these science fiction books, right? Is it the animals or is it the men that have ordered the creation of such beasts for their own servitude, for their own pleasure, for their own use? And then like Dr. Moreau's like, well, I'm trying to help the world. I'm trying to cure disease. Like I actually never intended for any of them to become, servants to Lizalde and his family, but they're still serving a purpose for him. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this doctor, he wants to create something that will give him accolade, to give him notoriety, to bring him back into the folds of civilized society back in France and England where he had been a scientist. So this also then gets kind of back to that age-old question of like, is there truly such thing as a selfless act, right? Can we truly do anything that does not involve self-interest? I don't know. That I still don't know the answer to that. I think at times our purest intentions are set, but ultimately we do something to feel good about ourselves and our place in this world. And this book was really good at questioning that. And again, who is the real monster? I think that's, if I had to summarize this book in one question, this is what Moreno-Garcia was asking the whole time.
I think that's really good because I didn't think about this just now, but Moreau in the original book, he's a mad scientist, right? And in those kind of books, they are the monster. He's the person who's doing this and he's a monstrous person, maybe even evil. But in this
Mhm.
book, even though we're told his reasonings for things aren't always the most altruistic, and even though he's aware of certain things and lies to other people, I never really got the sense that he was the bad guy. And I don't know
Mhm.
if that was just my
Mhm.
takeaway from it, or if that was intended in the writing.
Mhm.
I really felt like this book did a good job at portraying characters as not inherently good and not inherently
Yes.
bad, but complicated. People are capable of doing good things and
Yeah.
bad things, and sometimes they do good things for the wrong reasons, and sometimes they do bad things for the right
Mhm.
reasons. And Moreau was that. I think he definitely was. Clearly, he started out not being a good father,
Mhm.
but by the end, I think he actually cared for Carlota and wanted to be open and honest with her. I
Mhm.
think part of him did want to do good, and even though he was building these hybrids as potential laborers, he was also trying to prevent that life for them at the same time.
Yeah.
And so it's this weird of like, is Moreau a bad guy or not? I don't know. Like, I didn't
Yeah.
cheer when he died. I wasn't sad when he died. I just was like,
Yeah.
oh,
I was like, he died as a
he
result
died.
of like this
That's it.
conflict that was
Yeah.
created. Um, no, and you saying that too made me kind of think like there was also this element of like, instinct, like animalistic tendencies, right? So Carlota,
Yeah.
and Lupe and Cachito.
Mhm.
So Cachito is at some point like we do a time jump. So we were introduced to Carlota and Montgomery and Moreau and Lupe and Cachito. And you kind of hear that like people tend to prefer Lupe because she's not quite as like animalistic. Like she doesn't
Yeah. She blends in more.
she blends in a little bit more, whereas
Mhm.
Cachito is like very obviously a hybrid. And also the way that he acts, like
Mhm.
he'll kind of like nip in frustration like an animal would, especially like if he's not getting like sweets. And then we see later on in the novel that he gets defensive of the family, Montgomery and Carlota and Moreau, when the visitors come,
Mhm.
uh, the owners. And there's a lot here where it's like, how much of this is like humans fighting their animalistic instincts versus an animal fighting their human instincts in the hybrids. And like it makes me think that like Moreau, a lot of his behavior came from like a self-preserving nature, which is very animalistic at the core, right?
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
it's survival of the fittest, right? So as much as he knew that like Carlota and Montgomery and Cachito and Lupe like would be, where would they go if they didn't have funding and have this like safe space for the hybrids? And he lies in order to preserve them and himself to survive, right? And like tries to ship Carlota off to get married
Mhm.
to Eduardo, which is like the son of Mr. Lizalde. And all of that like could be said as very animalistic. Like that's a very natural instinct. Like preserve, fake it till you make it. Like just try to survive at any by any means necessary. And he did it in a very human way by lying and kind of putting on a show with the hybrids and like, teaching them to behave. He was trying to teach them like these one-dimensional human traits of like be good, be calm, be chaste, be patient, do these things that sort of like subdue the animal within you. But ultimately that animal instinct wins, right? Like our basic hierarchy of needs have to be met. I thought that was really interesting too. That like I don't know if he's evil, it's just maybe he found the balance between that animal instinct and the human side of it and played it really well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good observation. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know.
And that's everybody. That's all the
That's
main
everybody in the movie. I
characters.
think that's the whole point
Yeah.
of this, like, so one of the things while you were talking about the original story, I kind of looked it up to refresh my memory, was like H.G. Wells, part of this was like he wanted to show how like even man is very animalistic. Like even when you mix an animal with a human, the human still has these like animalistic
Mhm.
tendencies. Um, And so it just got me kind of thinking of like, Yeah, I think that was still kind of the point of this book too. It was told in a really different way, but like we see so many instances of like this, as much as like Lupe or Cachito, right? Did I say
Yeah,
that? Yeah,
cachito.
Cachito. As much as they like try to push that animal side of themselves down, it comes back up in like really stressful situations. Like somebody is yelling, somebody's getting upset, somebody's threatening to shoot somebody. There's a lot of instances of like violence, aggression, and anger in this book between the characters. Tensions run really high, especially again, you've got your basic needs aren't being met. They don't have money. They might get kicked out of their house because Mr. Lizalde, he wants to he wants to prove that his investment's been worth it. And his son is like, yeah, my father wants to talk to you. And you find out that it's because his father's probably going to pull the plug on this whole operation and what's going to happen. And that tensions run high. And we see a lot of that come out to play. A lot of these animal instincts between all the characters, even Dr. Moreau when he beats Cachito.
Oh yeah.
Like you even like there was a moment where she described it like everyone's like, we think that's enough, and he's like, I think you're right, but he has to like pull himself out of it.
Yes, yeah, has
Like
to be snapped out of it.
he's like pulling out his cane to like take it further. And even like and it's because Cachito bit somebody's hand. He hurt one of the visitors, and the visitor was like, well, please, go punish him. And even that visitor was like, wait, the cane's too much. Like he's already been beaten. His eyes swollen, he's bleeding, he's cut up. I think he's gotten the point. And even Dr. Moreau has to, take a minute, pull himself out. So it's really interesting, the balance of human and animal tendencies in all the characters, regardless of hybrid status or not.
Right. Yeah. It's when we think of an animal human hybrid, at least for me, the initial thought is the human is a little more elevated, right? You're going to try to bring in the more civilized elements of a human to counteract the more animalistic things. But to your point, humans are
still
capable
animals.
of really bad stuff. So you can be a fully human animal hybrid and still be capable of so much bad. And that's not because of your animal side. That's all your human side, potentially.
Exactly. Like, it's like how much of the human side is human and how much of it is animal? Like, are they truly 50-50? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't know. What else should we talk about? What else? That was real deep. We went.
I know, and we didn't even get to
home run at the beginning.
And we didn't even get to the point that a lot of this is a commentary on race as well.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you look at these animal hybrids, and that's easily just it's the colonizer looking down on anybody of color and thinking them as less civilized, right? And so there's that whole commentary too, and that's why I love sci-fi, because you are able to talk about these things in ways that are like, they're obvious, but not so in your face, right? You're able to ignore them. Yeah, you're able to. It's like, okay, this isn't about animals. This isn't about brown people. This is about animals.
This has nothing to do with colonizers.
No, not at all.
Colonized. No. Well, and so it's okay. Kind of getting into that. So Carlota.
Yeah.
She is described as this like beautiful creature.
Mm-hmm.
After our, I think we have like a 6-year time jump. She's 20. She starts the novel at 14. Now she's 20. And the most of the novel takes place when she's 20 years old. And she is described with like really dark hair, these beautiful features, very exotic eyes, the subtext being she's exotic.
Yeah.
Not so subtle subtext. And she meets one of our characters, Eduardo Lizalde, who is the son of her father's benefactor and who owns their property. And he is immediately infatuated with her. She's nothing he's ever seen before.
Mm-hmm.
He would love to bring her to parties. He would love to spoil her. And even like his cousin Isidro is there. Has traveled with him from their other casa. Wait, no. What was it? Something Hermosa.
Vista Hermosa, I think.
Yeah,
or Vista something. Yeah.
Vista Hermosa, which is like their other house, like their main house on this peninsula. And he's like, I just think he like gets bored. He likes shiny things. Like he had an affair with somebody for 2 months in Mexico City. Then it was over. I don't really want him to do that again. Like she's just a trinket. Like they're all objectifying this young
Sure.
woman who's never been exposed to the outside world. Like she has never left this compound, has only known her father and the hybrids and Mr. Montgomery. It was not so subtle, like exoticism and like misogyny wrapped in,
Yeah.
but that was the point. That was the time,
Sure.
right? And the commentary on that. I don't know what your thoughts were.
Well, I forget what part of the book it was, but up until this point, it's gone out of the way to say that she's beautiful.
Yeah.
And then there's this one point in the book that adds to that of like she's really dark, but despite that, she's beautiful.
Yes. Yes.
Right? Like, yeah. So it's always curious to see how authors tackle this when you're doing historical fiction in certain parts of the world and in certain eras of history, right? Where this is the norm.
Yeah. So for our readers, our listeners back home, colorism in Mexico is still very much a thing.
Oh yeah.
Because I realize that not every, like, because we're Latina, like this is such a big part of like our discussions, like in our culture. But not everyone knows about this, so we'll kind of talk about it. So, as in much of the world, light equals beautiful, dark equals property, less than something to own, something to like collect, right? Something is beautiful in spite of its color, or intelligent in spite of its color, surprising in spite of its color. There's a lot of that narrative around Carlota. I mean, she is said to be graceful. She is said to be intelligent and charismatic and funny and gorgeous and, all of these things, despite her sex and despite her race, despite her obvious coloring. And it is something that she becomes prized for, admired for, from a very like objective viewpoint. And it was very interesting in this book because knowing that this author is modern author, and knowing also Mexican Gothic, where there was like a similar narrative. I was kind of ready for that. I was like, Carlota's gonna fuck some shit up, knowing that this is kind of how Mexican Gothic went down too. But yeah, I don't know. I think there was a lot there that I'm curious to know what you were going to say, but I just thought we should preface that for anyone who doesn't know. And that colorism is still very prevalent to this day in Mexico and a lot of South American countries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Continue.
I know. I mean,
yeah.
You expect it. You expect it because of, like you said, if you're familiar with the author, you expect it. If you're familiar with the time and the
country and
the country
politics,
and where it is, especially with the backdrop of the Mayan, like I forget the exact term, but that revolution.
Yeah, because traditionally Mayans were also darker. The native population is darker.
Darker, yes. Yeah, the fair skin all came from Europe.
Yes, they were all the Spaniards and the British who came over and tried to conquer Mexico, or did conquer Mexico. And so it was assumed that if you were darker, you were probably mixed. Or directly descended from that gene pool. Yeah. And so I think at one point Montgomery talks about like the hierarchy in this area of the world, and how as a foreigner, he kind of is able to escape it. He's able to get around it because he's a British man, not from Mexico. So he's an outsider, period, but he's a light-skinned outsider. So he recognizes he has a lot of privilege that Carlota does not. So with her coloring, it does come into play with these visitors, how they view and treat her and the rest of the people on the property, compared to her father, who is a Frenchman, and is known to be a Frenchman, and is not described as being white, but we can envision is white, given that he is not facing the racism that she is. So I did appreciate that this author, one, tackled it very obviously from the get-go. And it colors every interaction in this book. I mean, the the microaggressions and the like nonverbal language that she describes in like every interaction between Carlota and even like Montgomery does it to her. Like he'll be like, oh, her beautiful dark hair and her graceful brown skin or whatever, as she like dances around, and how she blends in with the shadows at night because she's so dark. It's like, yeah, that's how she would have been viewed in the world at the time, and especially by men.
Yeah.
So that just felt really real for me.
I also think, though, there's a little bit going the other way, because they make it a point of saying Carlota loves Eduardo's green eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Which,
yeah.
So I think the same thing kind of goes the other way, where she looks at him and he is different and light and green, and she's...
Well, but she's been exposed to European fashion magazines.
Yeah.
So her only images of the outside world have lauded light-skinned, lighter eyes.
So then it just goes back to society saying this is the beauty standard, which is still the case up to this day. So that's what she's saying. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fair.
And she hasn't seen other men other than Montgomery and her father, who are white.
Right.
So I still think, yes, he's a foreign object to her, but I think that any beautiful man could have potentially had this effect on her. But I think because her imagery of a traditional male, because there are hybrid males, is the European beauty standard. Absolutely. And I think that's why she kind of even says, like, I can't stop thinking about his green eyes. Like, that's all she really likes about him at first, is what he looks like. So I do agree with that. That goes both ways. The like collection and like the admiration of their physical traits is very obvious from the beginning, and is the basis of their courtship for a good majority of the time. They get physical pretty fast, people.
Oh, yeah.
There is no waiting for marriage in this book. They hide it. Like, they're not like running around being like, yeah, we're having sex over here. But that does happen very quickly, especially given that she has like had zero exposure to men, grows up very pious and not puritanical per se, but I mean, her father isn't really teaching her the birds and the bees. So no. I don't think she knows what any of that is.
He's trying to merge the bird into bees, but
yeah, exactly. But yeah, so their whole courtship is based around like physical appearance and attraction, not necessarily like who they are. Like, he's fascinated by her, but it's not really going the same way in that sense. Like, she's not like, oh, you're so intelligent for a white guy.
And all the girlies say I'm
pretty fly for a white guy. I mean, do you think she was a strong female character? I mean, and how difficult is that to write in this setting?
I think this author did a really good job of developing her into a strong female character. I think it also stayed very true to the time period, and then true to the characters. I don't want to give too much away because it is a very new book. But there are secrets in this family. And I think that when she uncovers these secrets, she really like embraces a side of herself and empowers herself in a way that felt very authentic to the time period and her circumstances. Like, she really rose to the occasion, really grew into herself as a result of the adversity that comes to play with the family they're getting kicked off their land. They kind of have to fight for their lives and all that stuff, kind of similar to the book, where there's conflict between hybrids and the doctor and Lizalde and everything. So
yeah.
I think she did a really good job. She was a very interesting character. I think she went from being like very naive, docile, pious young woman to a very strong, skeptical, and, selfish, empowered in a way that she was like, I know what I want now at the end of the novel, and went for it and stuck to her. What am I thinking? Stuck to her guns. There we go.
There you go. That's like, yeah, it is. I think it is challenging to write a female character in this setting, because so much of women at the time, they weren't people. They were property of first their father and then their spouse.
Mhm.
right? That was it. Is like you do what I say until you're married, and then you do what the husband says.
And like there's
And
even notes about how like a woman couldn't get married unless her father said so.
right.
And like she wasn't allowed to leave the house unless her father allowed her after the age of like 20 or 21 or what. I don't remember. There's a whole section on that.
And then the book also goes into how if a man sleeps with a woman and like
Mhm.
sullies her, then she is therefore basically like no good as property anymore, and then you can like the father of the son or what has to pay like reparations for like there's like legal consequences.
Yeah,
Like really,
they really go to court for that
yeah,
stuff too. Like if the groom doesn't want to marry her,
yeah.
which
There,
is
that's what it is.
which is also like historically seen in like European societies as well. Like
Hmm.
in Europe in high society, yeah, you slept with somebody if a lord slept with another lady or miss who is in society, you best believe if they got caught. I mean, anyone who watches Bridgerton, if they got caught, they had to get married. And that is not a stretch from the truth. That was 100% real. But of course, when you marry or when you cross societal boundaries, like in this case, like Eduardo sleeping with her, he didn't owe her anything. She
Mm-mm.
was not a woman out in society.
Mm-mm.
She was a nobody in the middle of nowhere that nobody knew about. He did not have to marry her. So I mean that was definitely something that this author did a really good job of playing into another layer to this character, Eduardo and Carlota, respectively, about how their relationship played out and why the betrayal at this point, because this is when things start to come out, the secrets, what makes it so much more interesting, because he was going to marry her. He really
I
was.
was honestly surprised he was
I
going
was
to.
surprised too, because men are trash
Yeah,
comes out.
there he is.
Perfect
But
time.
yeah, when he actually announced the engagement, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
I thought you were just going to sleep with her. And like, what are you talking about? I never said anything. Bye.
Right. I totally thought he'd be like, okay, Dr. Moreau, we're out of here. And she's like, wait, I
Yeah.
thought you said you were going to marry me. And he's like, you're
Go
crazy.
on. Yeah,
I thought
no.
he was going to gaslight her or
Yeah.
like just be like, you're a whore. I don't know. You're a nobody. I don't have to
Yeah.
do anything. But I mean, her dad does fight for her. He's like, no, they've slept together, which I was like, Dad, you knew. I mean, and he was parading her around like a prize to be won. So to be fair, I think he wanted that again to again,
Moreau.
that's like the animal instinct of like, you sleep with him, we get money and we get to keep
Yeah.
our house.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
go ahead, wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Oh, he was
As much as
absolutely pimping her out.
oh yeah, he's
Yeah.
dressing her up,
Yeah.
beautiful gowns, doing her hair, enticing them with
Mm-hmm.
his daughter. But yeah, so that was really, I think, very well done. It wasn't always there, but you knew it was there. She didn't have to explicitly say it. She did a couple times, but you knew. You were like, this isn't going to end well. Which is why the twist was so good. At least
The twist.
Should we talk about the twist or should we leave that for people to discover?
I think maybe we should leave that. I think we got.
I don't want to ruin it too soon.
Yeah, it's a newer
people.
book, and I think
It hasn't
even
come
if you've
out
read
for
the
some
original
people, yeah,
book
yeah.
that this is based off of, there's still enough kind of in here too.
But I want to know. I
To
want
make
to
it
know,
fresh.
Rico. And I want to
What?
know, listeners.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you saw the twist coming, did you know?
Well, actually, no. I'm glad you brought this up because I was going to ask you, because when I was reading it, it was like, I know that this twist is coming at the end. Absolutely, this twist is 100% there. Like 5% of the way in, I knew this twist was coming.
Okay.
And then as the book kind of kept going, I'm like, you know what? Maybe not. Maybe it's a red herring. Maybe that's what the author is expecting you to think. So that's not going to be the case, because they introduce some other pseudoscience of like, that's not the case. And then later on, like, no, it's definitely happening. So when the twist actually was revealed, I'm like,
Okay.
yeah.
I never doubted myself, but yeah, I saw it pretty early on as well.
Yeah.
I was like, this is so suspicious. But we're not going to say too much, you guys. We're going to actually keep this one to ourselves.
Yeah.
Because it's a new book. I think this is fair.
Yes.
That
Yeah, and there's
is
lots more we can get into. We haven't really touched upon Montgomery
No.
at all. We haven't.
No.
We haven't talked about the rebels.
Yeah. I don't want to.
Yeah, there's so much more, but I think we touched upon the biggest things.
Yeah.
We can leave the rest up for everybody else to discover on their own.
Yeah. Discuss amongst yourselves.
Yeah.
Find us in a coffee shop. Talk to us.
Yeah.
In Sacramento.
Or online. You can find us online.
That's true. comment on our Instagram.
So currently on Goodreads, this book is rated 3.97 out of 659 ratings. So it is a newer book, so there's a few ratings. I'm sure by the time this episode releases in a week, that number will go up.
Mhm.
Actually, funny enough, I think I checked the rating yesterday and it was at 4 point something,
Oh, okay.
which I think is mostly from the advanced readers.
Mhm.
And so now that the general public has gotten their hands into it, it's going down a little bit. But I'll be curious to see where it kind of averages out in about a month or so.
Mhm.
Bella, would you say this book is shit or the shit?
I think if we have to go on such a strict binary,
Yes.
the shit.
Yes, I agree.
I really enjoyed this book. Very easy read.
Yes.
It really made me just dive into the story. Really easy to pick up again because I wasn't able to read it like all in one sitting. And the characters were super interesting. I mean, especially I would say after like the 40% mark, I think I really got into it. Once we have like Eduardo and Isidro and then Montgomery's stuff coming up, it made for a really good book.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it took me a little bit to get into this book. For the first, might be like 21st like quarter of it, I just couldn't get into it. But once I was in it, I was definitely in it.
Slow burn at first 25%. Total
yeah,
slow
and
burn.
I think some of it is just the nature of it being historical fiction for me.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's hard for me to get my head into that universe and like really accept it. But once I was in there, I blew past the rest of it. It was really fun. This is, I think, my fourth book by the author.
What other ones have you read? I've only read Mexican Gothic. So
Certain Dark Things, which is a vampire book.
Yes, that's on my list.
Was it Gods of Jade and Shadow, I think is what it's called. And that's about Mayan like mythology. It's a fantasy with Mayan mythology.
Love.
Mexican Gothic, and then this one. And I would say this is probably my second favorite of her books that I've read. So it's pretty good.
I think I liked this more than Mexican Gothic. I think
Agreed.
Mexican Gothic was a lot slower and just like kind of generally lacked a little bit in terms of the action in it. Yeah, I think this one's definitely more my jam about that one. I liked the level of science fiction that was in this one more.
It's good.
I think Mexican Gothic was more fantasy than science, right?
I think we ultimately decided it was also science fiction, but it played like a fantasy.
Yeah. I remember that one being a little bit more complicated to put in a box.
It was all Gothic until the very end, and then they're like, oh, by the way, sciencey. But
yeah, that ending, the Mexican Gothic ending was very good. I think better than this book, I think, because this book, it made sense how it ended. That Mexican Gothic did not see it coming, was very complicated, very good payout, very well done. This one definitely, you're kind of like, okay, it kind of ended how I thought it would. For everybody, but this is also a retelling, so you also kind of know what to expect.
Which I will say, by no means do you need to read the original before you read this one. There's no.
This stands on its own.
Absolutely,
100% agree. Yes.
Yeah. So I think you can read, if you want to read both of them, I think you can read either in either order. They're totally independent. You can enjoy them both for separate things. But anyhow.
Yeah, I'm definitely adding the Island of Doctor Moreau to my to be read pile, which is 3 years long. But I'll get to it eventually. I got to build more bookshelves, man. You guys have unleashed a monster that was asleep for years and has now just gone out of control. The fact that we went to a bookstore to pick this book up and I came out with only a book for our other co-host Laura was a miracle. I practiced self-restraint.
I was very proud of you.
Honestly, the trick was just not to look at the other books for too long because I would find something I wanted. But I went in being like, any old Little Women books? Nope. Okay, move on. Get in, get out.
The trick is just scan the shelves.
Yes.
If something really sticks out and calls to you, it was meant to be. But do not go searching for any book. Don't go searching for any authors. Just quickly scan, walk towards the exit.
Yeah, that's what we had to do. That's what we had to do to survive. We are on a budget. So the book budget is non-existent right now. I went way too crazy for Small Business Month. Or Small Business Day. Or small
independent book
indie bookstore day. There we go. So yeah, that was a lot. All right.
Well,
So
speaking of your
yeah.
to be read list, what are you reading next?
What am I reading next? Well, we've got a couple upcoming episodes for After Dark. We've got our next After Dark book, which I'll let you talk a little bit more about because you are our selector for this book.
Yeah.
So I just kind of was like, sure, sign me up. So I have nothing to say about that. We'll let Rico unveil his kinks. And then and then what else am I reading? What's our next book? What's our book after this for August? What month are we in? August?
Yeah, so our next book for August is going to be The Book Eaters by Soon Yi Dean, which is out next month. So that'll be another new book that we're reading. And that episode is going to feature returning guest host Sarah Marie Hawkins.
Cool.
So that'll be the next book. But yeah.
Yeah. So that's on my to-do list. I do have a lot of other books. I do want to read some classics. I feel like there's some Jane Austen I haven't read, Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte that I have not read. So I bought some at Beers on Indie Bookstore Day that I should probably get to at some point. But yeah, just trying to read more romance novels. So I'm going to be looking to Emma, our other co-host on After Dark, for some recs she sent me. So just getting through that.
Nice.
Just powering through. What about you, Rico? What are you reading?
Well, now that I made my way through all of the Isaac Asimov stuff, I'm back on my bullshit and reading another Star Wars book. It's this one's Shadow of the Sith. It just came out in June, and this is one of the newer novels that bridges the gap between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. Mm-hmm. So if you watch the sequel trilogy and you have some questions, this apparently has some answers for you. So I'm getting to that. And because you mentioned it, our next After Dark book, it's called Stalked by the Kraken. And as you hinted to, this is my selection. We kind of agreed that we're all going to be taking turns choosing a spicy book. So this is my pick. It was recommended by a TikToker. And yeah, I just felt like if we're going to go spicy, I want to go kind of weird with it. So of course I had to just pick one with tentacles.
Oh, man. Which was, I think, the only thing I was like, you know what I don't like? Tentacles.
Look, you had a chance to veto.
People.
You had a chance to veto, and you didn't take it.
You know what? Because I am resolved to just join on the ride and see where this takes us.
Oh, yeah. You weren't on the last one, so this is going to be your first one.
This is my first one.
Oh, boy. Oh, so I am sorry ahead of time. But apparently it's really good. It has really good reviews, and other people who like spicy books, it's actually really good, which is ultimately why I chose it. Because it was between this one, it was between an alien one, and it was between, I'm blanking on the third. But I went with this one because it had good reviews. Okay? I chose it for the story. Thank you very much.
I'm sure that's what you say to your parents, or said to your parents when they found your porn search history.
Listen.
You were younger, okay?
Listen.
I mean, I know the internet was like a thing in your, 30s or something, but...
Just delete my history. That's all I ask when I go. Just delete my internet history.
Oh, God, no, that's not my job.
I didn't say you had to look at it. I just say you had to delete it. Anyhow.
No. That's not my job. I'm not touching anything.
All right, well, anyhow, so our next After Dark episode should be up in the next month or so. So just keep an eye out for that if you're interested.
We're gonna be very drunk for that. So have fun.
Oh yeah, it'll be good. It'll be a good time regardless.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And if you're one of my English students, please do not listen to After Dark. It is not appropriate.
Oh, that's 18 plus only. Absolutely 18 plus only. Yeah. Anyhow, if you read the Daughter of Doctor Moreau and want to share your thoughts with us, or have any questions, or if you got anything wrong, or even if you want to suggest any books for us to read, spicy or not, let us know on social media. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Shit We've Read. We're also on Facebook, but Facebook is a dead social media channel. So
what? Do you mean MySpace?
Friendster, I think it was. Yeah. GeoCities.shitwe'veread. And as I mentioned earlier, our next book for August is going to be The Book Eaters by Soon Yi Dean, again featuring returning guest host Sarah Marie Hawkins. So come back for that one. That'll be a good one. It's been on my TBR list for a while, so I'm glad we're reading it for the show.
At least someone's TBR list is getting done.
No. I read 1, add 4.
Okay, that's fair. As long as there's a 4-to-1 ratio there, it's all even.
And that's being generous. All right, Bella, thanks so much for chatting with me.
Yeah, thanks, Rico. This was good.
Yeah, maybe we'll do another Silvia Moreno-Garcia book next year. Just keep it going.
At this rate, we'll just do one a year. I like it. So keep them coming, Silvia.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Shit We've Read is hosted by Laura Benson, Jason Rico, and Bella Romero, with music by Joshua Chilton and editing by Jason Rico.
To join the discussion on this and all other books we've read, find us at Shit We've Read on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok.
For more information about us or to request transcripts, please visit shitwe'veread.com.
This podcast is part of the Bilo Network. Visit bilonetwork.com for more great geeky podcasts.
Thanks so much for listening.